few other games in sports have been giving an apropos name like that one, the Hand of God. The moment Diego Maradona scored the infamous goal in the 1986 World Cup quarterfinals for Argentina to help them defeat England in that quarterfinal matchup. But did you know the player on the English side, Stephen Hodge, who was responsible for kicking that ball, mishandling it, that led to that goal by Maradona, would eventually turn what was probably his lowest moment as an athlete into one of the greatest fortunes and one of the biggest sales in sports memorabilia history, almost $10 million just 36 years later. We'll take you back to that game in 1986 and tell you the story of this record-breaking sale here on Distant Replay.
This is Distant Replay.
Welcome into Distant Replay. I am Ben George. No Mike Noto on this episode. We're glad to be back. Taking a couple-year hiatus, just been busy with work and whatnot, but we want to ramp this show back up a little bit and try some different things. But, of course, we'll go back, revisit old games. We will have some more true crime and more here on the podcast. But today, I want to tell you about the Hand of God game. It's one that most sports fans are familiar with, especially soccer fans. We're just 37 years removed from that infamous game and just 1 year from that record-setting auction that took place at Sotheby's. We'll get to that here shortly, but I want to take you back first to that game that was played in 1986. It was June 22nd in Mexico City. It was Azteca Stadium. Argentina and England were squaring off, two strong teams, and this is what it sounded like.
Maradona just walked away from Huddle then. Maradona, Hodge and Maradona! They're appealing for offside. The ball came back off the foot of Steve Hodge, and Maradona gives Argentina the lead. The England players protesting to the referee.
Of course, England still to this day, and rightfully so, has plenty to say about that. But the referee in that match, who was from Tunisia, didn't see the handball. So, yeah, had really no option but to allow the goal to stand. There was no review at the time, right? Couldn't go back. VR couldn't come in and rule down on that. And it's a very controversial play. Many people still feel that it should have been disallowed. And in that celebration, Maradona ran to the corner flag, celebrated by punching the air with his fist. It's now considered an iconic celebration. But what's interesting about that game, and Maradona, right, initially claimed that goal was scored with his head, but later did fess up and admit to using his hand. But what's really remarkable about that game is the next goal that Maradona scored would later be voted goal of the century in a FIFA poll in 2002. It was one that you've probably seen. If you've seen any Maradona clip besides the Hand of God, you've probably seen that goal. He took it basically half the length of the field through the English defense, eventually going around the keeper and scoring a goal on his own. And that goal would give them eventually the win 2-1, although England would score late in the game, the 81st minute. They would punch one in by Gary Lineker, gave them a little bit of hope. It would eventually go to Maradona and that English side. Argentina would later go on to win that match, progress on, beat Belgium 2-0 in the semifinals before facing off against West Germany. Yes, West Germany in the finals of the World Cup there in Mexico City, 1986. A couple interesting things about that 1986 World Cup. It was the first World Cup to be held in Mexico since 1970. A short break there, but Mexico no stranger to being a host to these major soccer events. It was also the first World Cup to feature a round of 16 knockout stage. We might even see that expand again, but that was the first time that the World Cup had that format. Over 26 billion viewers worldwide tuned in to that tournament. It was a record-breaking audience, that broadcast was. And, of course, Diego Maradona, named player of the tournament, scored 5 goals, provided 5 assists, and Argentina, again, claimed their second World Cup win just 8 years after their initial triumph in 1978. So that's the infamous play. You're very familiar with that. Maybe one of those nuggets that I share with you was new to you. But for the most part, you're well aware of that goal. But I think what's very interesting about this story is how the player that probably carried the grief of that loss for so long, who probably was down about how that game played out, because you know how much the English love their football, right? And you look at some of the lists of the top moments in English football history. This is always going to ring up there. And when you see it, of course, you see the midfielder, Steve Hodge, who on that pass from Maradona, he mishandled it, tried to kick it away, instead kicked it back towards his goal where Maradona was behind the defense and still continuing his run when that ball found him, and he was able to head it in, yes. I've got that in quotation marks, for the goal. But Steve Hodge had a long career playing in the Premier League, played for a number of teams, but of course his high point of his career being the 1986 World Cup. So this guy, as a player who worked so hard, 24 years old, gets a spot on that plane to go to Mexico, came off as a substitute in the first couple of games. He had a huge cross that gave Gary Lineker his second goal in a first half trick, which allowed England to get through to the second round. They faced Paraguay. Hodge had another good game there as well. And then Hodge, of course, was there for that mishandling and ultimate hand of God moment. But because of this mistake that he made, and I don't know if Hodge had the awareness to take advantage of this moment, or if it was Maradona himself that maybe felt bad about how it all played out. But after this game, Hodge and Maradona swapped jerseys. You're well aware, standard practice. But who knew in that moment that Hodge was getting his hands on one of the most prized possessions in sports memorabilia history? And Steve Hodge would later go on, he would donate that jersey. He loaned it long-term to England's National Football Museum, which is located in Manchester, but then eventually pulled it out and put it up for sale. Sotheby's hosted an auction in 2022. Here's how they described the jersey, right? Some beautiful pictures that were put up, but they described it as good overall condition, consistent with heavy use, perspiration, and athletic activity, with slight de-threading on hemming on the front bottom of the shirt and minor spots throughout. I love that. Heavy use, perspiration, consistent with athletic activity. Well, it went up on April 20th and had just one bid, $4 million pounds. About a month later, eventually towards the end of the auction, there would be a run-up in bids, and he eventually sold for £7.142, which comes out to over $9 million. Pretty remarkable story how one of the worst moments in an athlete's career turned into a $9 million windfall just over 30 years later. So I ask you this, if you had the opportunity to have that moment and give up that goal, knowing that the result would be this jersey and this outcome, would you take it? Or would you have that moment back, clear that ball, and let's say could guarantee you an English victory and maybe go on to win the World Cup? Because we know England's World Cup history has been very frustrating throughout the years. It is something that has plagued the English for a long, long time. The 1966 World Cup, England's only World Cup title. They've been close. They've had some good teams, but only one World Cup title. Maybe that could have been the year. We don't know. But a remarkable story. Steve Hodge of England, the hand of God game, Diego Maradona, who passed away in 2020. One of the great soccer players, football players of all time. But a remarkable game with this one big moment. We all talk about the moment, the hand, the fist, the goal. But not many people talk about how this was a $9 million sale of that jersey just 30 years later. If you like the show, if you appreciate this story, want to hear more, we'd love to have you subscribe. Please do so, whatever podcasting app you listen to. And if you watch us on YouTube, please hit subscribe there. We'd appreciate that as well. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think about this story and whether you'd like us to do more sports history that ties in to memorabilia. We'll be back with more here on Distant Replay. I am Ben George. Thanks for listening. Glad to be back.